I came to tell you there are people who are suffering from the UN anti-Israelis and even more than Israelis. I belong to one of these peoples. Please allow me, please hear me out. The exaggeration of Palestinians' sufferings by blaming a Jewish for it, and the silence of the cry of those who suffer on the far largest scales. For 50 years, the indigenous black population of Sudan, Christians and Muslims alike, have been victims of brutal, racist Arab Muslim regimes in Khartoum. In southern Sudan, my homeland, about 4 million innocent men, women, and children were slaughtered from 1955 to 2005. 7 million were ethnically cleansed, and they became the largest refugees groups since World War II. The UN is concerned about so-called, quote-unquote, Palestinian refugees. They dedicated a separate agents for them, and they treat them with a special privileges. Meanwhile, my people's ethnically cleansed, murdered, and slaves are readily ignored. Today, in the Nuba Mountains, genocide is taking place as I speak. The Islamic regime in Khartoum is targeting the blacks, Africans, Muslims, and Christians. Nobody in the United Nations told the truth about the Nubian peoples in the Nuba Mountains. Do you hear the UN condemns Arab racism against Africa? That's a pathetical question. What you find on the page of the New York Times or in the records of the UN's condemnations is Israel racism or Israel crimes. The Palestinian sufferings. My people have been driven off from the front page because of the exaggerations about the Palestinian sufferings. What Israel does is being betrayed as a Western sin. But the truth is that the real sin happens when the Westerns abandon us, we the Africans in Sudan, the victims of Arab Islamic apartheid. Khartoum declared jihad on my peoples, and this legitimized taking slavery as a tool, as a war boot. The Arab militia were sent to destroy southern Sudanese villages and were encouraged to take Africans, women, and children as slaves. We believe that up to 200,000 were kidnapped and brought to the northern Sudan and sold into the slavery. I am a living proof of these crimes against humanity. I don't like to talk about my experience as usual, but I do it because it is important for the world to know that the slavery exists today. I was 9 years old when an Arab man by the name of Abdullah tricked me into the following him to the boat that going to the northern Sudan, where he gave me to his family as a gift. For 3.5 years, there is slaves going through something that no child should ever gone through. Brutal beatings, demonization, working around the clocks, sleeping on the grounds with the animals, eating the family left over. During 3.5 years, I was unable to say a word no. All I always say to everything is yes, and yes to everything. The United Nations, which I call United Do Nothing Nations, knew about the enslavement of the Southern Sudanese by the Arabs, and their own staff reported it. It took UNICEF, under the pressure from Jewish-led American anti-slavery groups, and also led by one of my friends sitting among us today, Dr. Charles Jacob. Thank you very much. 16 years to acknowledge what was happening. But the Sudanese governments and the Arab leagues pressure UNICEF, and the UNICEF backtracks and started to criticize those who worked to liberate Sudanese slaves. In 1989, Dr. Gasbiro, a courageous Hungarian man, worked with the United Nations, a special rapporteur on the human rights in Sudan, who report the slavery, resigned on a protest because the UN did nothing about his report. My friend, today, tens of thousands black Southern Sudanese are still serve their masters in the Northern Sudan, and UN is silent about that. It would often, the OIC, the Arab League, as a former slaves, as victims of worst sort of racism, allowed me to explain why I think calling Israel a racist state absolutely absurd. I have been to Israel 5 times, visiting Sudanese refugees. Let me tell you how they end up there. These Sudanese refugees flew Arab racism, hoping to find shelter in Egypt. They were wrong. When the Egyptian security forces slaughtered 26 black refugees in Cairo, who were protesting the Egyptian racism and Sudan, realizing that the Arab racism is the same, whether in Khartoum or Cairo. They need shelter. And where they find it? In Israel. Dodging the bullets from the Egyptian border patrols, walking for a very long distance, the refugees, the only hope was to reach to the Israeli side, the fence, where they will know that they will be safe. And indeed, they were safe. The blacks, Muslim from Darfur, choose Israel above all the Arab Muslim states of the area. Do you know what this means? Again, these are hypothetical questions. The Arabs said Israel is racist. In Israel, the black Sudanese Christians and Muslims were welcomed and treated like human beings. Just go and ask them, like I have done. They told me that compared to the situation in Egypt, Israel is heaven to them. Israel is racist? Another question to me and to my peoples. The people who knows racist, the answer is absolutely not. Israel is a state where people are colorly rainbow. Jews themselves came in the color, even blacks. I met with the Ethiopian Jews in Israel, beautiful black Jews. I came here today to tell you the people who suffer the most from the UN's anti-Israel policy are not Israeli themselves, but all peoples who the UN ignore in order to tell big lie against Israel. We, the victims of the Arabs, Muslims abuse, women's ethnic minority, religious minority, homosexuals in Arab Islamic worlds, who are biggest victims of the UN Israel hate. Because the UN will not tell you when the gay are being stoned to death in Iran, except telling you about Israelis should not defend themselves when they are being attacked. Look at the situations of the Coptics in Egypt, the Christians in Iraq, Nigeria and Iran, Hindus who suffer from Islamic oppressions, Sikh. We, the rainbow coalitions of the victims, are the targets of jihad. All suffer, and we all are being ignored. We are abandoned so that the big lie against Jews can go forward. In 2005, I visited one of the refugees camps in southern Sudan, and I met 12 years old young little girl who told me about her dreams. In her dreams, she wanted to go to schools and become a doctor. And then she went to visit Israel. I was shocked, honestly. I asked her, how could this refugee girl, who spends most of her life in the northern Sudan, know? When I asked why, she wanted to tell me that these are our peoples. In July 9, 2011, Southern Sudan becomes an independent state. For Southern Sudanese, means the continuations of oppressions, brutalizations, demonizations, Islamization and Arabization and enslavements have to end. In a similar, the Arabs continue to deny the Jewish right of its sovereignty in their homelands, and the Durban Conference continuing to deny the legitimacy Israel's, deny the Israel legitimacy of coexist. As a friend to Israel, I bring you the news that my presidents, the presidents of the new nation of Southern Sudan, the President of the Republic of Southern Sudan, Salva Kiir Mayardit, publicly stated that the Southern Sudan embassy, or the Southern Sudanese embassy, will be built in Jerusalem. not in Tel Aviv, against, but in Jerusalem. The internal capitals of the Jewish peoples. I also want to assure you that my own new nations, as nation of Southern Sudan, and all of his peoples will oppose the racist forums like the Durban III conference. We will oppose it by simply telling the truth, our truth. My friends, my Jewish friends taught me some things to say with you. I am an Israeli car. Thank you very much.